Hey guys, this is Mike Tarallo with Qlik. In this video, I'm going to walk you through creating a data mart using Qlik Cloud Data Integration. But this video is going to take a little bit longer. I'm going to spend more time talking about things that happen under the covers, discuss terminology and nomenclature, and show you the process from end to end. I created another video in this series where I called it a speed run. It was about a 9-minute video that really just went through the process to show you the end result as quickly as possible. So this video is going to now go through that same process, but explain a little bit more detail what's happening under the covers. So those of you who really want to understand how to use Qlik Cloud Data Integration and understand the processes that are happening, I would suggest that you watch this video from start to finish. Okay. So I'm already in my Qlik Cloud platform. I'm in the Qlik Cloud Data Integration area. I'm in my data projects location, and we're going to create a new data project. When you create a data project, you're basically associating it with a target cloud platform. And here are the platforms that we support as of the recording of this video. Do note you can write data to QVD files as well. In this case, we're just going to choose Snowflake because I have that connection already set up. I'm going to select that connection. That connection is available in my Do More with Qlik Data space. I'm going to click Test. It's successful. Click OK. And we're just going to give this project a name, and we're going to call it Data Mart Video. Okay, so creating the data project, choosing the space where the project is going to live, and also associating that data project with a connection that's supported by the target platform that we support. So now we click Create. When you click Create, it's going to open up a pipeline view. Now we also have what's called like a tile view that shows you the individual assets. I prefer the pipeline view because it kind of shows the flow, sort of a lineage. And the first thing you need to do is select onboard data. What that means is that you're taking data from a selected source and you're going to be writing it to a staging or temporary schema in the target that you choose, in this case, Snowflake. So when you click onboard data, it's actually creating two assets, a landing asset and a storage asset. And what you're doing is you're performing operations on that data in those different assets. So a couple of the other things to understand is the terminology that's being used here. You have your data assets, which are these individual objects here: onboard data, transform data, create data, land data, store data, or these are individual tasks or processes. So we call them data assets. Then there's the data sets, which are the results of those data assets that then flow or propagate through that pipeline. So you'll hear me use those terminologies. Then you have your tables and views, which are your either physical structure that's being written to the database or the query-like structure that's producing the data result without actually physically storing the data in the table, in that case called a view. So I'm just going to choose onboard data, and it gives it a name. Now, if you leave this name default, it's going to use that name in different places, and you can change it later. So we're just going to leave it now, and then you're going to see me change it later. So we'll just call it onboarding. And this brings up source connections. Now, I already went through creating source connections using the data movement gateway. Refer to these other videos to see that setup. So here I'm just going to choose the MySQL source connection. Click Next. From the tables in MySQL, I have a sales schema. And then the table we're going to be working with is sales, fruit, veg, sales, small. And we're just going to add that selected data set. Then just to show you what we're working with here, here is MySQL Workbench. And think of this as just transactional data. It's redundant data. It's a denormalized type data structure. Think of like, orders come in, an order gets written, and it has a store code, a store name, the sales amount, the sales date, the item that was purchased, the location of the store, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and break it up into a star schema, basically containing the facts and the different dimensions. So we'll have a store dimension, a region dimension, an item dimension, and then a fact table that has our sales date and sales measure and the appropriate keys that are going to be created automatically for us. Okay, so now we have our data set selected. Click Next. And then to finish the wizard, we can replicate with both current data and a history of previous data. In this case, we're just going to do replication with current data. We're going to do a full load in CDC for change data capture. So as changes are made to the source, they'll propagate over, and you'll see that happen towards the end of the video. And then do nothing basically just means just open up the pipeline view, or if you click Open Landing Data Asset, it brings you into the configuration of the landing asset. So we click Finish. And now we have our pipeline view. So you see how it named the landing asset onboarding_landing and the storage asset onboarding_storage. Those can be renamed simply by selecting this button and clicking Edit. So this is going to be the raw data landing area. So I'm just going to call it raw data landing area. And you can see it's of type landing. And then this one is going to be the first standardized data. In other words, if we want to change the columns, the table names, add some light transformations, etc. So we're just going to call this standardized data. Okay, so we renamed those for descriptive purposes. So now I'm going to just click on Open on the landing data asset. Now, as of the recording of this video, they have made some updates since I recorded the other parts of this series. In a landing data asset, you can now filter. In other words, it'll actually write like a where condition if you wanted to reduce the data that's being grabbed from the source that's written to the raw staging temporary area. You could also do explicit transformations. So if you wanted to make some changes, you can do that too. And there are globalization rules that can be added. Okay, normally you would do this in the storage or transform data assets, but they added this capability here as well, because what you can do here is create different structures to be used within your pipeline view. To make things simple, we're just going to leave this one alone, and we're just going to click Prepare. And when we click Prepare, I want to show you what's happening. If I click Settings, underneath General, it's using the Snowflake database Tarallo_sample, and it's going to create a data asset schema called onboarding_landing. Okay, so you can rename this if you wanted to. And then landing mode is full load in CDC as we selected before. And then there's the runtime, which we don't have to worry about at this time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up another database management client. This is called dbeaver, and I'm connected to Snowflake. And I'm just going to refresh the Tarallo sample database, and you can see it created onboarding landing schema and put the fruit veg sales table in it. Okay, now if we view the data, we haven't run the asset yet, so it's going to be empty. It's just going to show you the structure. So there's the structure that was created. So now if we click Run, it's going to take the data from the source and basically load it. So this would be like a simple replication, if you will. If you just wanted to simply replicate the data from one source to a cloud target, you know, your task technically would be done here. I didn't do any light transformation or pretty much any standardization. This is just moving the data from one place to another. Okay, so now on the monitoring view, you can see it's completed. So now I'm just going to go back in, and we're going to refresh, and we'll select view data. And now you can see that that data has been written to Snowflake in the onboarding_landing schema and so forth. So now this structure that we just created, okay, if we go into the pipeline view, this is now running. Okay, this is also going to detect if there's any changes within MySQL, and eventually we'll get into that when the changes get propagated through. So let's go into the storage data asset. So here now we're going to start defining the structure that we're going to need to create our star schema. So the first thing I want to do is I want to standardize on the data types. I know that I need a string data type. All of these are set up as WString. So I'm going to add a rule to convert all data types in this structure that have the structure of W string or the data type of W string, we're going to make it a string 50. So this is just a simple example of a globalization transformation rule. And it changed all the data types to string 50. Now, if you want to see more examples of data transformation, just look at the other videos in the series where I go into it in more detail. Next, I want to rename this data set, and we're just going to call this standardized data. And then finally, I want to specify the keys that we're going to use in the next process, the transform data asset, that's going to break up the individual tables. So I'm just going to define my store code, my item code, and my region code as individual keys. And for order ID, we don't need this in this particular example here, so I'm unchecking that key. Okay, now understand some of these options here are for use within the user interface of Qlik Cloud Data Integration, right? So when I set up these keys, these are going to be used later when we build the relationships in the model. Okay, so I'm going to click Prepare here. Now, if we go to Settings, you can see there's something called onboarding_storage. And the runtime apply interval, we're going to set to 1. Okay, so it's going to look for changes, every 1 minute, so it could perform the updates when we do change data capture. So now I'm going to click Run, and we can see that it's completed. I'll bring back the database management client. I'm going to refresh Snowflake. And now you can see we have onboarding storage. And we've created the view. Okay, so there's your standardized data. And there's your columns. And there's your data. Okay, so that's a data set that's now being used. So now we have our landing, and we have our storage, and now we have to perform a transform. Now you can see there's a specific order of operations also here. So you need your landing asset basically to access the source, right? So when you onboard the data, the landing data asset, so for example, if I said let's add a new land data, it's going to prompt us to select a source. Okay, now you can do multiple, by the way. This is not just a single flow. You could have parallel flows of data here in the pipeline. So I just wanted to point that out to you, right? So we have your landing, which gets the data from the source. You can perform some light transformations. Then we have our storage data asset. And now we can add our transform data asset. So you notice I can only add a storage from here. Okay, if I wanted to add another storage, I could do that too. Okay, so this is another thing just to show you. So you can branch off your data sets and perform different operations as well. Okay, so don't think it's just a linear type of pipeline view. This could be parallel and access numerous sources and merge data and join data and all that other stuff. I'm just giving you the barest essentials right now. Okay, so I'm deleting that, and we're just going to go back to the standardized data. So now we're going to transform data. Okay, and this is going to be responsible for creating the dimension tables. I'm going to show you what's going to how we're going to do that. So we have our data set that's coming out of the storage asset, and now we're going to add SQL-based data set. Okay, now I have a little cheat sheet here, and I'm going to copy and paste what I need into here. But basically what we're going to do is we're just going to issue some SQL to grab our distinct store code and store names from the data set, and it's going to automatically produce these individual tables that eventually through the star schema data mart process, it'll create the primary cert key relationship between the fact and the dimensions. So here we're going to create the store dimension table, and I'm going to use the data set, and it puts it as a parameter. That's the structure it uses here. So you must click extract parameters, and it automatically fills it with the name of the data set. Then you could add multiple here if there were multiple data sets coming in, but in this case we just have one. And then describe the table, and you're going to see it's going to have two columns, store code and store name. and then we give it a name. And since we're looking to create stores, this is just going to be called stores for the store dimension. And we click OK. Now we're going to repeat that process for region and items. So we select our data set, add SQL-based data set content, select distinct region code and region from our standardized data set, extract parameters, describe table, and now we'll have our region and our region code, and we're going to call this new data set region or regions. The third time, now we're going to get our distinct items. And we'll call this data set name items. And then finally, we want our facts. So we're going to select the standardized data set, and we're just add that over here. And then we're going to rename this, and we're just going to call this facts. Okay, so now we have our 4 data set structures we're going to be able to use within our model and in our relationship. But before we do that, we're going to go to data sets, and we're going to perform some light explicit transformations, such as defining our keys and removing some columns we won't need. So for example, for our items dimension, our item code is going to be our key for our relationship. For regions, our region code. And for stores, our store code. Now if we go to facts, you can see our store code, item code, and region code have already been defined. We did that previously. But I don't need our store name, I don't need item, and I don't need region. So we're going to remove those columns because those dimensional values are already going to be in our dimensional tables. We just want our primary surrogate key relationship. So once that structure is done, if you want to see what's going to happen under the covers, you can choose the button next to the data set and select generated SQL. And then you can choose the different jobs that would run. In this case, incrementally applying changes, update the fields, creating the artifacts. You can see how it's creating that structure and the load. And you can see where the data is coming from. Okay, so if you wanted to do troubleshooting purposes or understand what's happening under the covers, you can see the generated SQL jobs for all of this. Finally, we'll go to settings, runtime, apply interval will be 1. Back to general, it's going to create a data asset schema called create dimensional tables. And we can choose the ability to create a materialized or non-materialized. In this case here, we're just going to leave it simple. I'm just going to choose non-materialized. So we click OK, and we click Prepare. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the dbeaver Database Management Client. I'm going to click Refresh, and you're going to see there's our Create Dimension Tables structure. Now I'm going to click Run, and now it's going to populate all those tables. I'll just give you a quick example of that. If we go into items and we view the data for items, you're going to see the individual item code and the item. So it broke those tables into dimensional tables and facts. So if we look at the facts, okay, and notice that there aren't any keys in here just yet. The automatic key generation is going to occur within the star schema. Okay, so once that's all generated, we're going to go to Model, and this is going to now be fed into the star schema. So you can look at list view, model view, recommended relationships. Being we defined our keys, we can use the recommended relationship view here, and we can always make sure you click Apply. And that is the relationship structure that is going to be defined. Okay. This is going to then be used by the data mart data asset. So now we're going to go to the pipeline view and now choose create data mart. I'm just going to leave data mart the default name, click create. We're going to add the star schema, which basically means choosing the fact table. In this case, our facts table. And we're just going to leave these settings by default for now. And now we're going to add our dimension, stores. Now the button is up here, regions, and repeat that for items. Then I choose facts. I select the recommended dimension relationships. Click apply. And now our star schema has been created. Go to settings, runtime, apply interval 1, and click prepare. I'm going to go to Snowflake and refresh, and you'll see now we have something called Data Mart. And this is going to be basically our ultimate resulting schema. So we click run, and we can watch the processing tables, queued 1, loading 3, loading 1, completed 3. We have now completed the table loads. Now back into Snowflake and refresh. And now underneath our views, if I do view data for facts, we have our facts, our sales date. We have our natural or business key in here, but then we have our auto-generated keys listed as HDR items key ID, HDR regions key ID, and store key ID. And you'll see those will link up nicely to our items table and our regions and our stores. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add some transactions to the source, and we're going to see ultimately this propagate. So right now what you have is stores A through E. Let's go to regions. You have Boston, Orlando, New York, and Sacramento. There's 2 Bostons in here with 2 different region codes. And items, we have apples, bananas, oranges, carrots, lettuce, peas. So let's look at MySQL. And let's look at 2 insert statements. So we're going to add a new store and a new fruit, and looks like a new location here. Okay, and we're going to do record ID 1077 and record ID 1078. So we're going to add cucumbers, Pennsylvania. So basically a new vegetable, it's store F, and a new fruit, cherries, Texas, store F. Okay, so I'm going to execute these statements, and you can see 1 row affected, 1 row affected. We're going to select the data directly from the source in MySQL Workbench, and you can see now we have 2 new records here, 1077 and 1078. So now we're just going to sit tight for a few minutes and let our data pipeline perform its process. And you're going to see data is updated to a minute ago, data is updated to a minute ago, etc. So now it's going to recognize those inserts, and it's going to propagate this all the way through the pipeline. And ultimately what we'll have is updated dimensional tables with the new store, the new locations, and the new item. So what you can do, if you want, you could always go into the individual data assets and go to monitor, and then you can keep track of what's happening here. So if we look at general and we can look at the CDC status, you can see we have 2 inserts had occurred. Okay, so process changes, the latency, and 2 inserts occurred. So we know that the raw data in this case has been updated. And you can do this for each one of the data assets. So we go to monitor view of the storage data asset. And we can look at the last batch of changes. We can see that 2 records were processed. And let's ultimately go to the data mart. And if we go to the last batch of changes, you can see our record indications. So let's go see the result. Okay, now let's view our data for items. So there we go. We have cherries and cucumbers, a new vegetable and a new fruit, assigned with new keys. Let's look at regions. There's Texas and Pennsylvania added to our dimensional table for regions. And let's look at our stores. We should have store F in there. And there's store F. Now let's look at our facts. And there it is, record 1078 and record 1077. So we just waited about that extra minute to get both those records. So everything has been updated with our new records being added to the source. Okay. I made it before the 30-minute mark. We'll see what happens after I do some of this editing, and maybe I'll shorten it down a little bit. Right now I'm at about 29 minutes, but with some editing it might be a little shorter. All right, guys, so that was the process from start to finish, along with some of the under the covers of what's happening when using Qlik Cloud Data Integration and using the data assets within the pipeline view. If there are any questions, please post them where this video is posted, and myself or our colleagues will do our best to answer them. Always make sure to look in the Qlik Cloud Data Integration section of the Qlik community to post your questions there as well, to get more immediate responses, if you will, along with supporting documentation and links out to samples. Other than that, I wish you well. I hope you stick with me and you can see the power of utilizing Qlik Cloud Data Integration, and I hope to see you on the next video. All right, guys, have a good one. Take care.